Hey everybody. This is my first episode of this, and so we're gonna just get into it with World War One and the review for our test, which is Monday, April. What is May? May. It is May this month. What is Monday? Monday is May 20th. We have a test. So that is for everyone in Mrs. Ireland's classes. So overall, this is going to look through every single notes thing that we took, and it's going to just generally talk about everything that we need to remember from this unit for this test, and just kind of a basic overview so that you guys get a solid understanding of this event in the 20th century. So, hi. So if you want to hit me up on my Instagram, I can eventually put my Snapchat, but that's a little bit about me. I'm in Ireland's first hour, so I usually take the test first. So yeah, you can DM me if you have questions after this. So we're going to jump right in with the causes of the war, the underlying causes. These are our main causes. So this comes straight from our Trail to War cartoon. So let's talk some of the causes of the war. So first things first, militarism. So we talked about industrialization in our 19th century unit, and basically this industrial buildup and this crazy amount of weapons that people are manufacturing causes these European countries to stockpile and build up their armies. So let me look quickly. So this is excuse me. This is a chart of military spending per year leading up to World War One. So let's look at Germany, for example. So in 1908, Germany was spending $396 million on military. And in 1913, the year before the war, they were spending $573 million. So that kind of shows you just generally this buildup of spending on military things. So let's go back. So our A is alliances. So this alliance system, this Bismarckian alliance system, develops since after the Napoleonic Wars, and it kind of entangles everyone in Europe with each other. So basically, your main alliance is your Triple Alliance and your Triple Entente. So the Triple Alliance was originally Germany, Austria, and Italy. Italy eventually drops out of that side and switches sides in the war. So instead of Italy fighting on the side of Germany and Austria, you have the Ottoman Empire becoming the eventual Central Powers. And then on the other side of the war, you have the Triple Entente. So France and Germany don't like each other. In 1871, right after German unification, this Franco-Prussian War breaks out, and basically France and Germany kind of go back and forth with this one territory of land, which is something that France wants back very badly, which is kind of something that Germany wants to protect, and that is the Alsace-Lorraine. And later on, we'll talk about this, but Alsace-Lorraine gets given back to France as a part of the Treaty of Versailles, as a part of that territory reparations that Germany has to give up as they take the war guilt. We'll get into that, but France and Germany don't like each other. Also, so France, England, and Russia is the Triple Alliance. And what you need to know is that Russia allied itself with other Slavic nations. Russia wasn't friendly with some other countries. Like if you think about, it wasn't friendly with Bulgaria, but it was very friendly with Serbia. So yeah, so Serbia and Russia are friends. That's what you need to know. And Russia kind of identifies as the big brother of these Slavic peoples. So they kind of are the big guy, kind of breathing down the neck of these politics. So we'll get into this a little bit later. Yeah. So the alliances. So here's a visual aid to help you kind of understand these alliances. So here you go. So Italy and Austria-Hungary signed an alliance in 1882. Germany signs an alliance with Italy in 1882 and in 1879. Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany is kind of these northern German-speaking states originally, kind of led by Prussia, and they did not want Austria to be the powerful German-speaking state. So they kind of had a little bit of a rivalry, but they're friends because they both speak the same language. They're friends with Bulgaria and the Ottomans eventually. On the other side, again, you can see Russia is friends with Serbia, and Russia is friends with France, and France and Britain have been friends after the Napoleonic Wars. Let's go back and talk about imperialism. Okay, so imperialism is another thing that we touched on with our 19th century unit. So imperialism is this kind of land race. So you see these kind of rivalries develop in Africa and in Eastern Europe and Asia. You have spheres of influence in Asia, and you have colonies in Africa as this carving up of Africa happens. So let's look at imperialism. So you can see imperial holdings like the United Kingdom is a relatively small home nation, but it has lots of imperial holdings, which can make countries like, if you look at Germany, Germany doesn't have as many imperial holdings, so that can kind of develop a rivalry between Germany and the United Kingdom, and France, of course, has lots of holdings as well. So that's just kind of more of a visual representation of that as well. Okay, on to nationalism. So nationalism is something that we touched on again in the 19th century. It is this intense form of patriotism. Nationalism comes in that you find pride in your country above everything else. So examples of huge nationalist movements are the Slavic independence movements, which we talk about with the Balkan Wars and Balkan crises, German unification, and this kind of British idea of the white man's burden. So you see that in nationalism. So here's kind of this idea that although the Allies were united, they were each their own country, and they had their own ideas, and they had their own beliefs, and they had their own kind of what they were fighting for. They were fighting for their country and this idea of national pride. So as we talk about these underlying clauses of the war, we're going to get into the kind of the spark that lights this powder keg. Let's go back over this kind of tinderbox that is this kind of this tinderbox that the Balkans are. So this is Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on the fateful day, June 28th, 1914. So this is the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. So let's get a little bit of context about why Franz Ferdinand is visiting Sarajevo in Bosnia. So basically in 1908, Franz Joseph, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, annexes a Balkan state by the name of Bosnia. So this angers other Balkan nations, especially Serbia. So Serbia is think of Serbia as like the little guy who's trying to kick around. Like he's a little troll who's kicking at your feet, and you're just this big, tall giant. And it's just kind of annoying. So Austria didn't really pay all that much attention to that. So Slavic people ended up being split between these nations. So you could be identifying as Slavic, but you could be living in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and you did not want to be under Austro-Hungarian rule. So they were hoping for a pan-Slavic nation, so that eventually becomes Yugoslavia after the war. So Serbia. Okay, so Serbia had gained its independence from the Ottomans in 1878, before this annexation of Bosnia. And so Serbia has this intense nationalism for such a small nation. Um, Something else is there is endless violence in the Balkans. So that was pretty normal for Serbia to wanting to be like kind of kicking around. So the Black Hand is a nationalist terrorist group, it's a Serbian nationalist group, and they assassinate the Queen and King of Serbia in 1903 because they were not moving towards this pan-Slavic nation. So the Black Hand was really, really powerful. They had members in high military and government positions, which can kind of, we'll talk about that when we get to the ultimatum to Serbia after the assassination of the Archduke. But terrorists, they were terrorists, and they used their political power and their political assassinations to shape Serbia and the Balkans. So from 1912 to 1913, we have the Balkan Wars. The First Balkan War starts because of the Moroccan crisis. Now, Morocco is in northern northern Africa, so it's kind of a little bit farther away from the Balkans. So in 1905, from 1905 through 1911, Kaiser Wilhelm tries to drive a wedge between England and France because there's English Morocco versus French Morocco, and it backfires and leads to England and France becoming closer, and France eventually takes control of all of Morocco. So Italy sees this as a chance to go against the Ottoman Empire, which is at this point a very, very old and failing empire. So Italy takes Libya. And so, because of this, Serbia believes that it can take part of the Ottoman Empire. It attacks the Ottomans to drive them out of the Balkans, and that is the First Balkan War. So in the Second Balkan War, Bulgaria attacks the other Balkans because of them not getting enough land from the Ottoman Empire in the First Balkan War. So the eventual results of all of this crazy Balkan conflict leads to some things that we will see kind of a ripple effect in for 1914. So some results is that Serbia doubles in size, and Russia and Serbia become friends. They become the best allies. Austria and Germany are ready to put down some Serbian nationalism. They kind of want to take Serbia down a peg. And after losing to Japan in 1905, the Tsar of Russia really needed to put his foot down, and he tried to protect Serbia, which represented Russian interests. So let's get on to this fateful day of June 28th, 1914. So we have an entire packet that has the timeline of everything that happened as of that day in 1914. So basically, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He is the heir apparent, and he is a moderate in Austrian politics. He was not the greatest guy. He was not well liked by his empire. He was fiercely Catholic, and he was unenlightened and very conservative. So, for Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie arrive early to Sarajevo. They're visiting Bosnia to kind of visit their eventual subjects, is how they're seeing this. And so they want to include Bosnia as a part of the empire. And so they visit Bosnia on a very important day in Slavic history, and that kind of makes people a little bit mad because it's kind of representing this them being annexed. And so the Black Hand plans to assassinate Franz Ferdinand because he is coming and he's going to do this big parade, and then he's going to visit with officials at Sarajevo, and just Bosnia. And so Franz Ferdinand and his wife, there's a bomb set out by the Young Serbians. So the Young Serbians was a group that was provided for by the Black Hand, and they were um, they had a plan of how to attack Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. They were planning on killing him, and so basically the Serbian government and the Black Hand provide them with some materials. They provide them with a bomb and some guns and the ability to assassinate um, the Archduke. I'm reading right now from the Purple Packet, just trying to kind of keep this kind of going. I can't always talk off the top of my head. There are some things that I forget. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the warning. So, Serbia knew that the Black Hand had given these. They knew of the assassination plot, and they were like, "Oh crap! If this actually happens, we're gonna get screwed over. Austria's not gonna like this, and they're gonna find out." And so they issue um, the Serbian minister to the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His name was Johann Jovanovic, and he was given the task of warning the Austrians. But he can't be like, we know it. He can't say like full out that we know that there is going to be a assassination attempt, because then that would implement that would get the Serbian government a little bit more involved, and they didn't really want to do that. They didn't want to be tied to the assassination plot. So he just kind of, excuse me, he just kind of gives them kind of like, hey, there might possibly, maybe, really soon actually be an assassination attempt. And so he tells the Minister of Finance the assassination attempt, and he said it would be kind of good for Franz Ferdinand not to go to Sarajevo. Um, so Austria doesn't really get the warning, and they don't heed this warning that they really don't get. So Franz Ferdinand goes to Sarajevo, and he is assassinated. And so the there wasn't really that much security on the parade route, which made it easy for them to assassinate Franz Ferdinand. And so a man by the name of Kabanovic, what was his full name? Beso, yeah, Beso Kubrivanovic. He took a bomb and he threw it at Franz Ferdinand. Now the cap that led to the explosive hit hit a lamppost, and it alerted the driver. And so the driver steps on the accelerator, and Franz Ferdinand is safe, and he doesn't die because of the bomb attack. And Kabranovic takes a cyanide pill, which is a defective cyanide pill. There's more to get into. You don't really need to know all that much about the cyanide being defective. But basically, um, the explosion injures spectators and some of the people who were involved in the parade. Um, so after the bomb, Franz Ferdinand wants to go visit the people who are injured, leading to the a change in the parade route, which the driver, who was not from Sarajevo, did not know the streets all that well. He turns off of the main avenue that they were planning on traveling on as a misturn, and he pulls up right in front of one of the young Serbians. His name is Gavrilo Princip. Gavrilo Princip is something that we're going to have to remember. He is stopping for a drink and having a sandwich, and what his luck, there's the man that his group of friends attempted to assassinate. And he pulls out a gun and he shoots the Archduke and his wife, Sophie. He shoots Sophie first, and then Franz Ferdinand. And after this, he gets jumped by the crowd around him, and that is the thing that starts the First World War. So after the assassination of the Archduke, what's really important, I am pulling out my Trail to War cartoon now. I'm going to talk a little bit about my annotations here. So this is kind of a similar kind of idea right on screen right now. So we have this powder keg in the Balkans. So I've already talked about the Balkan Wars of Independence, and I just finished talking about the assassination of Archduke. So Austria, before they go to try and send implementation to Serbia, they go and talk to their close friend Germany, and they say, "Hey, Germany, if we deal with this as we see fit, will you guys support us unconditionally?" So Germany says, "Yeah, so you can deal with Serbia how you see fit." So Austro-Hungary sees this as, "Hey, if we need to, they'll support us in war." Okay, so Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia. There are three things that you need to know about the ultimatum. So they asked Serbia to stop anti-Austro-Hungarian propaganda. They wanted to remove anti-Austro-Hungarian officials from the Serbian government. And the third one is the kicker that Serbia did not want to have happen. And they did not want, Austria-Hungary wanted there to be an Austrian investigation in Belgrade to see how far this Black Hand, or if how far Serbia was implemented in this assassination. And so Serbia is like, crap, we can't have Austria investigating on our soil. And so they refuse the ultimatum. And Austro-Hungary sees this as a full refusal of everything, and Austria sees this as a full refusal, and they do not take it lightly. So then Russia mobilizes in support of Serbia, which means that they get their army ready to go. They start getting their men equipped and moving them toward the borders. So Germany tells Russia, "Hey, back off. Get out of this conflict." And so Germany and Russia are kind of neck and neck. And so, a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and Russia completely mobilizes. Germany and France then mobilize. Germany declares war on Russia and France, and they implement their Schlieffen Plan, which is this speedy warfare. And Germany starts to march through Belgium. They are going to march on France because they do not want to go through this heavily fortified area on the Franco-German border, and they march through Belgium. Belgium is neutral, and Britain is like, "Hey, get off of Belgium. They aren't involved in this," and Germany refuses, leading Great Britain to declare war, and all of the major powers are at war at this point. So getting into the war, so we have this idea of the Western Front. So the Western Front is after the first couple of moments of the war being mobile, this kind of race to the sea with the trenches, and the digging in of after Germany invades Belgium and France, which is kind of what this. So let's look at the Western Front side of this. So Belgium and France is where this is fought. This is known as kind of Flanders. So if you've heard of the poem In Flanders Fields, um, this leads to this kind of stationary trench warfare. We've learned quite a bit about trench warfare in this intricate system. And overall, throughout the war, there was lots of artillery, but you hear this shell shock and this constant bombardment of the trenches and these complex artillery barrages. And you hear about these machine guns. And the Western Front is kind of this um, idea of what we have of World War One. And so if you look at these maps of these trenches and these complex systems and this way that they would move troops through the trenches, it is crazy. So moving on to the Eastern Front. So the Eastern Front is fought between Russia and Germany. It's more mobile than the Western Front because Russia keeps getting pushed back because they keep suffering losses. Russia is unprepared for this war. Some of their men don't have rifles. They don't have all of their equipment, and the Tsar goes to the front lines eventually in 1915. And Germany is also at a disadvantage in that they are split between these two fronts. Germany is kind of sandwiched in the middle of Russia and France. And so they do not want to be fighting this two front war, which is why they tried to implement the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan failed spectacularly. The Schlieffen Plan was this idea that we can go and we can fight real quick warfare and get France out of the war, which is that what they ended up doing in World War II. Um, they ended up doing it correctly with the Blitzkrieg warfare. Um, so yes, so on the Eastern Front, there's also the Ottomans, and they tried to British British try to knock out the Ottomans in the Straits of Dardanelles, and that is a whole nother kind of war front that I won't get into. And yeah, so moving on to the American side of what America is doing at this point. So in April of 1917, America eventually enters the war. It takes them a minute. So the RMS Lusitania is an ocean liner. It's a passenger ship. And so on May 7th, 1915, it is sunk in Atlantic waters by German U-boats. They had been the um, One of the newspapers had issued they had been given an ad by the German embassy saying, hey, don't ride on British ocean liners. They are a possibility to be sank. And so this event alone kills 1,198 people. There were 2,000 passengers, and in 18 minutes, 1,198 people are killed. They are drowned. And of those 1,198 people, 128 Americans are killed. American civilians. These are civilians. These are not military vessels. Eventually, it is found that the Lusitania was carrying military weapons and therefore was warranted. But still, it kind of shows how civilians are still a part of this entire situation. So, Germany puts there's an outcry from America. These civilians want these people who are killed avenged. Even former President Theodore Roosevelt wants the United States to eventually enter the war. And President Wilson decides to stay neutral. He doesn't want to enter the war. And Germany apologizes officially to the United States, kind of settling the tensions, and they put the off limits on ocean liners for U-boats to sink. This leads to a form of restricted submarine warfare for a limited amount of time. So, Germany is having some trouble after this unrestricted submarine warfare. They are being blockaded by Britain and France. They are not getting any food, and it's really early on in the war that civilians are starving. And so Germany needs to figure out a way to get out and how to knock Britain out. So they're thinking if they can knock British supply lines, which are dependent on Americans, um, they can knock Britain and France out and get food to their people. And so, in 1917, Germany plans on restarting an unrestricted submarine warfare. So they have their foreign secretary, Arthur Zimmerman, send a telegram to Mexico. They want Mexico to distract the United States, basically. They Mexico is they've just come from a huge long civil war. Um, Mexico is not the most pro-American state, and they ask Zimmerman asks Mexico to fight a war against the United States to keep the United States distracted from the war in Europe. Um, Mexico is promised in return territories like Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Um, this Zimmerman note is intercepted by Britain because the German telegram lines have to go through Britain to get to Mexico. And they send it to the United States, and the United States is enraged. It is basically Germany wanting to. It's kind of like Germany going behind their back. It's like that three-way phone call, from that one scene from Mean Girls. That's kind of how it feels to me. So, this kind of leads to people wanting the United States to enter war even more. And after the Zimmerman note, Germany goes back into unrestricted submarine warfare, which is kind of links back to Lusitania in that these are civilian ships that are getting sunk by German U-boats in a military fashion. And so this leads President Wilson to ask Congress to declare war on Germany, and America officially enters the war as Russia is leaving. So let's get into the Russian Revolution now. So I know it's a lot. So in Russia, they're having some problems. They've been knocked down a peg. In 1905, they lost a war to Japan, pretty bad. And so the Tsarist rule had been an autocratic rule for 300 years under the Romanov dynasty. And so Russia is unprepared for war when they entered in 1914. It makes everyone's lives worse when they go to war because these people are starving already and they aren't getting the nutrients and the food that they need, even as they're working these long hours trying to produce this Russian war machine. Um, and so, as Russia is failing on the front lines, Nicholas goes to the front lines to command his troops, leaving his wife, Alexandra, who is a German princess. She is the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Her cousin is Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and so she's kind of seen as not a real Russian. And so she is influenced by this man by the name of Rasputin. He's a mystic. He is kind of um, he's searching for power, and so he kind of gets in Alexandra's head, and he kind of takes over the government. Rasputin is assassinated eventually by Russian um, members of the Russian aristocracy, but anyway, Rasputin kind of takes over, and he then gets assassinated, and it kind of leads to this distrust, even more so within the Tsarist regime. And so, in March of 1917, in Petrograd, which had been the name of St. Petersburg during the war, the March of the Women kind of is the beginning of this March Revolution. And so these strikes, and then Tsar Nicholas tries to shut down the strikes, and then the soldiers that he tries to shut down the strikes with join the strikers, and it basically leads to the Tsar having to abdicate because of this increasing pressure. And so this leads to a provisional government taking over. And so it that creates the Petrograd Soviet. So Soviets are these, like, think of them as like local governments. And so they're like these little spheres of influence. And so the Petrograd Soviet is kind of like, think of it as like the lead Soviet. So there leads to a struggle between some political parties. Now, people at this point are wanting to get rid of this backwards kind of medieval style of economy that they were doing under the Tsarist rule. And so they want to go toward a communist or socialist kind of style of government. And so that is a struggle between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, which are both kind of socialist, radical thinkers, but the Bolsheviks are more radical. They're a little bit more on the left. And so they are led by these two men by the name of Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. So Vladimir Lenin gains power, and under the provisional government, Russia still stays in World War One, which people don't want. And so in October, the Bolsheviks take power. They overthrow the provisional government, and they kind of run under the slogan of peace, land, and bread. They're planning on getting us out of the war, getting rid of these, like giving the common people land and giving people food. They're focusing on more domestic ideas. And so the Bolsheviks eventually sign a detrimental peace treaty with Germany and Austria. So uh, Brest-Litovsk is this treaty, and Leon Trotsky organizes it basically, and he gets Russia out of war. They have to pay lots of money, and they eventually give up a fifth of the overall territory of the Russian Empire to get out of this war. Then they start their own civil war between the Reds, the Red Bolsheviks versus the anti-Bolshevik Whites. And so during this time, the Bolsheviks assassinate the Tsar and his family, and basically Russia is out of World War One, and they are dealing with their own problems. And so let's hop on over to the allegory. We're going to talk about Animal Farm, which was the May 15th analysis and stuff that we were talking about today. And so basically, this is an allegory for the struggle of power between Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin. So Lenin is kind of this overall old guy. So Lenin is the one who has the idea. He is represented by this character of Old Major in the book. His ideas are the foundation, and when he dies, because he has a lot of strokes after taking power, it's a lot of stress trying to deal with all of these warring factions and just trying to get Russia to the Soviet Union. So he passes away of a natural cause, stroke, and after his death, there's a struggle between Snowball and Napoleon, who are representing Leon Trotsky and Stalin. So Lenin actually believed that Trotsky was the better choice. He wrote his last testament, which was kept secret by his wife and eventually Stalin. They didn't want people to know what Lenin actually thought. And so Stalin had lots of friends, and he basically gets to become leader. Stalin becomes kind of this calculating person, and he takes power of the Soviet Union. So that's a little bit of interesting. Trotsky eventually gets assassinated in Mexico. Um, Moving on. So this is kind of, we're going to talk about overall effects of the war now. So kind of this astronomical number for us to think about. 16 million people are direct casualties of World War One, like in death and numbers. So 16,000. This includes civilians and military people. So there are about 8 to 10 military deaths. So 60% of that goes to the Entente, France and Belgium and Britain and the United States and Russia. that is where most of the fighting is happening. So France is kind of angry because they are invaded, and most of the casualties fall upon their side of the war and their land and their civilians. So they are hugely impacted by this war. About 40% go to Austria and Germany. And then 6 to 7 million civilians are killed. 1 million of those are Entente people, um, because it was again fought on Entente land, and so you could also see that numbers of people were killed because of famine and starvation and disease. Um, there's of course the Spanish flu pandemic that is sweeping through at the end of the war because of this constant movement of troops and this easy passage of disease. Um, in Germany, as I mentioned earlier, there was civilian starvation early on in the war, even because they could not get food into Germany. There's also the Armenian genocide that was happening at the same time. Um, that is an Ottoman Empire. So 1 to 1.5 million people are systematically killed. So we think of this like this is such a huge number to think about. Um, and it's just insane to think that this is what we lost during the war. So, moving on to a little bit more of a, I guess, different topic. So, we're moving on to the end of the war, the official peace talks. What what happens because of the end of the war? So, on November 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Germany signs an armistice in a train car, and it is a ceasefire. The war is officially over. After that, in 1919, Paris hosts the peace conferences, uh, and so the terms of the peace are dictated by these men in the left hand column. These are the leaders of the war, basically. Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Lloyd George, the United Kingdom Prime Minister, Vito Orlando of Italy, and George Clemenceau of France. France is specifically kind of angry at Germany. So Germany invades France and they destroy farmland and French land, and they kill almost all of a generation of France's men. And so this kind of leads to two treaties. So there's a couple of treaties. So there's a covenant for a League of Nations. This is because of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Woodrow Wilson wanted there to be a free space where people can talk about issues. He had a very idealistic view of the end. He wanted there to be no empires and just free communication between countries. The ironic thing is the United States never ratifies this because of its isolationism, and Wilson's dream is not realized in the United States. The League of Nations ends up being kind of a mess. Um, and then there's also the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles you should tie to Germany. It gave Germany some very harsh reparations. So the Treaty of Versailles assigns the war guilt to Germany. This is something that France really wanted. And it gives Germany has to pay almost $400 billion in today's money of war reparations, paying for losses to French economy and French and just kind of detrimental things that Germany did to the Entente. It also led to Germany having a limited army. The idea is that if they have a limited army, they cannot fight in another one of these major wars. Eventually, that doesn't happen. Because of the Treaty of Versailles, you could argue that Hitler can become a leader in Germany. So the Treaty of Versailles is a harsh, 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 harsh treatment of Germany and leads to this power of this nationalist dictator. There's still more that Germany was required. So it stripped Germany of territory. Think of it strips Alsace-Lorraine and gives it back to France, which Germany had won in 1871 in the Franco-Prussian War. It gives Poland, which had been dissolved and absorbed into Germany and Austria and Russia. It recreates Poland, and it also takes away all of Germany's imperial holdings. Now, Germany being late to the game because it only unified in 1871 did not have as many imperial holdings as, say, the United Kingdom, but they still had some. And so the Treaty of Saint-Germain, or Saint-Germain for those who don't take French, Austria-Hungary becomes dissolved. It becomes split up into various countries like Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and just Austria and just Hungary. It falls apart, basically. And that slide you don't need to look at. So, yay. I think that is the end of everything. I can talk a little bit, if you want me to, about All Quiet on the Western Front. I can do like a little bit of a video analysis of that, talking about some of the characters. But overall, this is kind of a general summary of everything. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time that I film one of these. Thank you.